This is the story of how Asia's biggest company grew like a weed for 16 years until it and the entire Chinese video game industry collided head on with the power of the Communist Party. Guess what happened? Today we're going to talk about Tencent. Imagine a single app that encapsulates your entire life. It greets you in the morning, hangs with you all day, and is the last thing you see at night. The one place where you buy things, talk to your friends and family, share presentation files with your coworkers, order dinners, pay taxes, and fulfill your bills. That is Wechat. It is the first thing that Chinese people install in their new phones. Its ecosystem is so powerful that it has basically bridged the divide between iOS and Android. It is a piece of software that basically runs a nation, and it belongs to a private firm. Tencent has leveraged its prized asset into a network of investments that make it like Facebook, WhatsApp, PayPal, Electronic Arts, and a private equity fund, all in one. Founded in 1998 by 5 people, including Ma Huateng, who runs it now as CEO, Tencent grew quickly with its 1999 desktop messenger product QQ. The QQ Penguin is pretty well known throughout China. This desktop business helped Tencent grow well at the start, but the company really took off in 2011 after the release of Wechat. Wechat exploded on the back of the QQ desktop messenger and eventually outgrew it. Joining a world dominated by other mobile players, Wechat developed into a monopoly partly through rapid product updates. It was more than just an extension of the QQ desktop messenger. In fact, they were built by different teams. They had originally tried to simply port the QQ product for the phone, but could not make it work. So a small product team, led by a guy named Alan Zhang, went back to the drawing board and rethought every assumption. Weixin was born, and was later given the English name Wechat. The small product team moved Wechat forward with startup speed and a flurry of new product features. First was the support of voice messages, which made it much easier for people to convey a long message without having to type it out. Next came Moments, a way to share images and text with your friends. This became like the Facebook news feed, with the caveat that only your friends could see what you posted on Moments. It allowed Chinese users to express themselves freely, somewhat. Then after that came official channels, which gave verified brands a way to directly communicate with users. These live right in the WeChat interface next to your chats with school friends, family, and coworkers. Fashion bloggers, for example, would take up official channels and become influencers, making money through their posts. This monetization came through the WeChat wallet, which allowed people to pay money for things and to people. And through that came the ability to do all the things that WeChat is famous for today. WeChat's next hype product feature was the mini program, a lightweight app living within WeChat itself. Most of these apps are simple JavaScript web pages, less than 10 megabytes, that can enrich people's experiences without having to leave the WeChat screen. I've used it myself. They have some pretty cool applications where you can play, music to help you sleep. You can play video game. You can play almost like a small video game, such and such. And few of these companies have realized the implication of having these small mini apps within WeChat. Why bother downloading an iOS app or even developing an iOS app or an Android app if you can simply do it in WeChat? So for a lot of people, then you have a question. WeChat has 900 million active users, almost all of them in China. But if WeChat is free to use, and it is, and most of its integrations are free to use, which it is, so how does Tencent make money? Line, another massive messenger in Japan, pioneered revenue through the sale of stickers and other value-added digital products. But WeChat doesn't really do any of that. So how does this company make some 40 billion a year in revenue? There's a blog out there famous for attacking the quality of Alibaba's revenues, and they wrote an article from a long time ago asking about Tencent's revenues. They counted up all the digital assets that QQ supposedly sold, then asked with a little bit of snark a question like, so where does Tencent's money come from? So the reality of it is that it's a few things. Digital products, movies, I believe they funded Wonder Woman, advertising. They also make a lot of money through investments in companies that take advantage of WeChat's networks. But the majority of the money that they make comes through games. Tencent is the world's biggest video game company by far. They own some of the biggest and most profitable games in the world. That includes majority stakes in companies like Supercell, which makes Clash of Clans, Riot Games, which makes the League of Legends, and a 40% stake in Fortnite maker Epic Games, which, a stake worth some $6 billion after Epic raised funds from KKR at $15 billion valuation. And just to be sure, they own a big stake in the company that makes PUBG too. The company sometimes localizes some of these games and ports them for release into China, which has led to one of the biggest games in the world that you probably have not heard of, Arena of Valor, or Honor of Kings, or Realm of Valor. It's pretty much a mobile port of League of Legends. Tencent Games made it after Riot declined to make League of Legends available for the mobile. So why would Tencent, which has Wechat, which is one of the most amazing, business assets you can possibly have, would want to get involved with something like video games? The reason is because video games are a high cash flow business that play on our monkey brain addictions. With the use of microtransactions, free-to-play games like Realm of Valor or Arena of Valor, such and such, they can generate boatloads of cash. They, in fact, generate some 20 times more than what you would imagine to be the traditional model of selling games for money. The biggest cost after the game is developed is to get users to play them. And that is where Wechat comes in. Wechat is essentially a big user acquisition tool for Tencent's games and its other applications. They splash big game ads right on top of your chats that are irresistible. And once you start playing the games, they start bringing in money like video games have never done before. And yes, people do actually spend money on these games. Like the author of the Deep Throat IPO blog that was there before. I have an accounting background. I found his stuff on Alibaba seemed pretty solid, but the Tencent analysis is pretty shallow. His specialty appears not to be in digital video gaming. The thrust of his analysis was just to count out value-added service offerings in the annual report, as well as subscriptions, and then naturally there's a discrepancy, and he calls them a fraud. If that's the case, there's a lot of companies in America that make video games like Zynga, companies in Britain like King, which makes Candy Crush, and Epic Games, for example. They would be frauds in his book too. There's a lot of accounting haggles between video game companies and their accountants, but has nothing to do with cash flows. Cash flows are real. They come through a verified third party, and it's a business model that many, many public companies have. All right, so enough with the rant. Let's talk about the freeze. So by the end of 2017, Tencent had become Asia's biggest company, worth over $500 billion. And the company had its game business growing faster than ever before. Wechat began exploring the advertising space. Moments Feed was starting to grow advertising revenue at an immense rate. Investors was dreaming of an advertising business that is the same size of Facebook's, which would add another $40 billion of revenue on top of what it already had. The portfolio was growing extremely fast. They had public company investments in JD.com, Meituan Dianping, which is a food delivery company, and China Literature, which is an ebook company. And that company actually was IPO'd in Hong Kong in 2017, and the IPO price went up 90%. So everything was looking to look great. Everything was things to be fine. Well, until, as it is always in China, things just turn around, and it has to start. It starts and ends with the party, and the party started changing things in a way that didn't really care about the businesses and the business or the revenues or what was being affected. It just did what it did. It started with new regulations that forced Tencent to tie people's actual identities to their video game IDs. Then the company had to tighten further by playing identity checks and an age floor for that Arena Valor game I showed earlier, so that someone under 18 would not be able to play the game for more than a few hours. But that fell short of what the party wanted, so then came the big blow. In March 2018, the party froze every video game release in the entirety of the country. China is the only country in the world where a video game needs to have its content and mechanics approved by the state. In 2017, it approved 9,651 video games for play in the Chinese market. January-February, 1,982, and then nothing. The license approval process had already been so complicated that no foreign developer can possibly hope to get approved without a local partner. Tencent makes actually a lot of its money by being the Sherpa for these games. So a company like Bluehole that has PUBG, they wouldn't be able to get the game through, or any hope to getting the game through, into sale in China unless they were partnered with Tencent. And Tencent, of course, gets its cut. And it's a two-step process. The first step is to allow the game to be released, so someone can just play it. But the second process was to allow the monetization of the game with microtransactions, and this has to be approved. And this second process, which was overseen by China's General Administration of Press and Publication, is the one that got frozen. And it was ostensibly to restructure the State Game and Media Content Regulatory Agency and to move it deeper within the party apparatus. But even after the restructuring had been reportedly completed, there were still no approvals. There no explanation, of course. And some games were literally left in the lurch, like in the middle. PUBG is the most public example. It got the first approval, so it was released and, of course, became immediately popular. But the second approval did not come, and the party said nothing about when to expect them to resume. So you have a big company like Tencent paying all the costs to actually, support PUBG, support its players, market the game, stuff. It actually can't make any money from it. So, but this wasn't just Tencent. Every company, big and small, in this massive industry was affected. But what can you do? I mean, you're in this industry, and the party is not even responding to even the biggest company in Asia. So you just had to ride it out. So on the August 2018 earnings call, Tencent came in with its first profit drop in a decade, and the president, Martin Lau, made it clear whose fault it was. From a revenue growth perspective, gaming is a key area of weakness, and our biggest game is not monetizable. He means PUBG. The administration is also aware of the fact that because of the restructuring, it's now affecting the industry as a whole. That's a bold statement to make in a public forum, and you gotta imagine the feelings behind the statement like that. That day in August 2018, the stock dropped 3%, and it kicked off a market decline that would eventually top $200 billion. And interestingly enough, fellow Chinese gaming company NetEase had pre-announced this massive industry event in an earlier earnings call, about a couple days earlier, when their CEO said that a government bureau restructuring was causing a delay in game approvals. And that day, Tencent stock was up 2.4%. Either nobody listened to that NetEase call, or nobody who actually did listen to it thought, hey, this massive industry thing that this one Chinese gaming company pointed out and caused them to miss earnings might also be affecting the biggest Chinese gaming company of them all. So it wasn't actually until December 2018, 9 months after the freeze, that the industry regulator began to approve games once more for release and monetization. Now it's no longer within a state bureaucracy, but the Communist Party propaganda department itself would now be overseeing the process of issuing licenses and allowing monetization. And Tencent stock, of course, jumped 4% on the news. The process, though, has been changed. And there are lists, very specific lists, that no one really knows what they are, but they signify what is good or bad. And there are checks on the video game AI itself, as well as extensive censorship. A few weeks later, the first 80 or so games had their approval through, but none of them were Tencent. I think Tencent later, a couple of weeks later, got one game approved. It was kind of like some sort of mahjong game. This should be good news except for one thing. During the wait for approvals to restart, the Chinese economy began to slow. And for whatever reason it might be, whether it has to do with the trade war or the excessive debt in the economy, growth slowed and the stock market turned. China Literature stock dropped more than 50% from its peak. Meituan began to do layoffs, and all of this stuck sucked value out of Tencent's invaluable investments. So let's conclude. I mean, this has been a long video. So is this a story of a company that's grown too big for its britches and is getting a smackdown from the Communist Party? Or are we looking too much into it? With the party, you can never know for sure. It's an authoritarian power that considers its own rule the foremost thing to hold. They are more than familiar with the concept of killing the chicken to scare the monkeys, so that they can make a point. Tencent is a really big chicken. It would probably set a lot of scared monkeys straight. Yet at the same time, the party runs a government, which means listening to the people and responding to social issues with new regulations. And it does seem like video game addiction is a real problem in China with real consequences that has to be addressed. Parents were complaining that video games were too violent and game addiction was ruining or affecting kids' lives. And there have been studies, not definitive, but there are studies that imply that the high rates of myopia in Chinese kids could partially be a result of them staring too much at phone screens at an early age. And so, as the party spokesperson said in the December speech announcing the restart of video game licenses, it's this guy here, we hope through new system design and strong implementation we could guide game companies to better present mainstream values, strengthen a cultural sense of duty and mission, and better satisfy the public need for a better life. So the party is, Tencent is still a centabillion-dollar company, and the company seeks to get even closer to the Communist Party. But I think the interesting thing to get out of this is that they seem to have learned a very valuable lesson. They've been very pliable to whatever the party's been recommending in terms of regulation. And they now realize that even though that they are a private company, they exist in an era where they need to be more than helpful and always be willing to demonstrate their usefulness to the Communist Party.